The wrench slipped from Owen Carter's hand and clanged against the metal floor of the cargo bay. He cursed under his breath and bent down to retrieve it, his knees protesting after 6 hours of crawling through maintenance tunnels. The thermal scanner in his other hand beeped insistently, displaying readings that made no sense whatsoever. Heat signature. Organic. Coming from behind the cargo containers stacked against the far wall. Owen wiped sweat from his forehead and approached the containers slowly. The Steady Horizon had picked up this cargo 3 days ago at a backwater mining station, and nobody had bothered to inspect it properly. Standard procedure for a vessel that barely made enough credits to keep flying. He squeezed between 2 massive containers marked with symbols he didn't recognize, following the scanner's increasingly frantic beeping. Then he heard it. A sound like paper tearing mixed with a kitten's mewl. Behind the last container, wedged in a space barely large enough for a person to fit, sat a transport crate with one side cracked open. Heat shimmered in the air around it. Owen set down his tools and pulled his shirt over his nose before leaning closer. The smell hit him first, sulfur and something sweet like burning sugar. Inside the crate, among scattered pieces of shell that gleamed like rubies in his flashlight beam, a creature no bigger than his forearm struggled to free itself from a membrane. It was covered in wet crimson scales that caught the light and threw it back in tiny sparks. 2 small wings lay plastered against its body, and a tail whipped weakly back and forth. Owen had seen pictures in biology databases during his technical training. This was a dragon hatchling from the Pyraxis system, a species classified as restricted due to their potential danger when fully grown. Smuggling one carried a sentence of 20 years in a detention facility. The hatchling turned its head toward him. Golden eyes, already somehow ancient despite being minutes old, locked onto his face. It made that tearing paper sound again, and Owen realized it was crying. His hands moved before his brain could catch up with all the reasons this was a terrible idea. He reached into the crate and carefully peeled away the remaining membrane. The hatchling's scales were cool to the touch, which was wrong according to everything he knew about Pyraxis dragons. They were supposed to run hot, their internal furnaces igniting within hours of hatching. This one felt barely warmer than the surrounding AI, or IT had been trapped in that crate too long, malnourished before it even entered the world. Owen pulled off his jacket and wrapped the hatchling in it, tucking the bundle against his chest. The creature stopped crying immediately and pressed itself against his shirt. He could feel it trembling. For a moment, he just stood there in the cramped space between cargo containers, holding an illegal alien that could get him thrown in prison, and felt something in his chest crack open. Growing up on a farming colony, Owen had raised dozens of animals. He understood the look in a creature's eyes when it decided you were safe. He saw that look now in those golden eyes staring up at him. Getting back to his quarters without being seen took 20 minutes of careful maneuvering through maintenance corridors. The Steady Horizon ran with a skeleton crew of 9 people, and most of them stayed in their own sections unless something broke. Owen's room was barely larger than a closet, filled with spare parts and tools he'd collected over 5 years of service. He cleared a space on his bunk and set the hatchling down gently. IT immediately started crying again, that awful papery sound that made his teeth hurt. Owen rummaged through his personal supplies until he found an emergency protein bar. He broke off a small piece and offered it. The hatchling sniffed it, then turned its head away. He tried water next. Same result. His mind raced through possibilities. What did newborn dragons eat? The databases would know, but accessing that information would flag his account for review. Then he remembered something from a training module years ago. Many reptilian species needed specific bacteria to properly digest food. Bacteria they normally got from their parents. Owen grabbed his coffee mug from that morning, still half full and cold. He dipped his finger in it and held it out. The hatchling's tongue, thin and dark as smoke, flicked out and touched his fingertip. It recoiled, then tried again. On the 3rd attempt, it began licking the coffee residue off his skin. Not the coffee itself, Owen realized. The bacteria from his mouth that had transferred to the mug. He spent the next hour carefully feeding the hatchling tiny amounts of food that he'd chewed first, feeling ridiculous and relieved in equal measure. The creature's scales gradually warmed under his hands. Color returned to its eyes. By the time it finally curled up his jacket and fell asleep, Owen's back ached and his jaw was sore, but the hatchling was breathing steadily. He sat on the floor beside his bunk and watched it sleep, knowing he'd just made a choice that would change everything. The ship's biosensors would pick up the anomaly eventually. Captain Reeves would demand answers. The authorities of the next station would get involved. But right now, in this moment, Owen had saved a life. He'd seen fear transform into trust. The hatchling's chest rose and fell in a peaceful rhythm, and one small clawed foot stretched out to rest against his hand. Owen pulled his blanket over both of them and closed his eyes, already dreading the morning but unable to regret what he'd done. Outside his door, the ship hummed through empty space, carrying its cargo of freight and secrets toward whatever came next. 3 days changed everything, though Owen wouldn't realize how much until it was too late to turn back. The hatchling grew faster than any creature Owen had ever seen. By the second morning, it had doubled in size and began making sounds that were less like crying and more like purring. Owen started calling it Ash. After the color, its scales turned when light hit them at certain angles. The name felt right somehow, like it had always belonged to this specific creature. Feeding became easier once Owen figured out the routine. Ash needed food processed through human digestion, at least for now, and it needed warmth. Owen kept his quarters at 28 degrees, which left him sweating through his shirts but made Ash comfortable. The hatchling followed him everywhere, scrambling across the floor on legs that grew steadier each day. But hiding a rapidly growing dragon on a small cargo ship was like trying to hide a fire in a paper warehouse. Riley found out first. The first mate walked into the maintenance bay without knocking, looking for a spare coupling, and froze when she saw Ash perched on Owen's shoulder. The dragon was the size of a small cat now, wings partially unfurled for balance. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Riley's dark eyes moved from the dragon to Owen's face and back again. Then she slowly closed the door behind her. "That's a Pyraxis dragon," she said quietly. "Yeah. Do you have any idea how much trouble you're in?" Owen lifted Ash off his shoulder and set the hatchling on his workbench. It immediately curled up on a warm heating element he'd installed specifically for this purpose. "I know exactly how much trouble. Didn't really have a choice." Riley crossed her arms and leaned against the wall. She was 20 years older than Owen, with gray streaking through her black hair and scars on her hand from a decade of military service before she joined the merchant fleet. She didn't scare easily, but worry lines creased her forehead now. "Captain's going to find out. The biosensors have been showing anomalies for 2 days. He thinks it's a malfunction, but tech support is coming to check the system tomorrow." Owen's stomach dropped. Tomorrow. He had one more day. "I'm not giving Ash up," he said, and was surprised by the steel in his own voice. Riley studied him for a moment, then walked over to the workbench. She held out one scarred hand toward the dragon. Ash sniffed her fingers cautiously, then pressed its snout against her palm. Riley's expression softened in a way Owen had never seen before. "My daughter had a dog back on Earth," she said. "Thing was mean as hell to everyone except her. Bit 3 people before animal control got involved. But with her, it was gentle as could be. Slept at the foot of her bed every night." She pulled her hand back and looked at Owen. "I saw the same thing with that dog that I'm seeing now. That creature knows you're its person. So you'll help me? I'll buy you time. But Owen, you need to understand something. Dragons bond for life. If they separate you two now, while it's this young, the trauma could kill it. And even if it survives, it'll never trust another living soul." Riley walked toward the door, then paused. "Captain's a hard ass about regulations, but he's not cruel. When he finds out, and he will find out, be straight with him. Tell him everything." She left Owen alone with Ash and a countdown that felt like a weight on his chest. That night, Owen couldn't sleep. Ash had grown restless as the hours passed, pacing in circles around the small room. The dragon's scales had begun showing patterns, darker lines that swirled across its body like smoke frozen in time. When Owen tried to settle it down, Ash climbed onto his chest and pressed its face against his neck, making a sound like wind through leaves. "I don't know what happens next," Owen whispered to the darkness. But I won't let them hurt you. Ash's only response was to curl tighter against him, small claws pricking through his shirt. The dragon's heartbeat thrummed against his ribs, fast and strong. Owen wrapped his arms around the creature and tried to memorize the feeling, just in case the knock came at dawn. Owen was feeding Ash pre-chewed breakfast when Captain Reeves opened the door without waiting for permission. Behind him stood the ship's security officer, a Talveen named Shira with 4 arms and an expression that suggested she'd seen everything worth seeing in the galaxy. Reeves looked at Owen, then at Ash, then back at Owen. His jaw tightened. My quarters. Now, and bring that thing with you. The walk to the captain's office felt like marching to an execution. Owen carried Ash against his chest, feeling the dragon's heart racing even faster than his own. Crew members they passed in the corridors stared, but said nothing. Word had already spread. On a ship this small, secrets lasted about as long as ice and vacuum. Reeves sat behind his desk and gestured for Owen to take the chair opposite. Shira stood by the door, all 4 arms crossed. The captain pulled up a datapad and scrolled through what looked like regulations and legal codes. You're carrying a restricted species, Reeves said flatly. That's 20 years detention. No parole. I know, sir. The penalty for the ship is seizure and complete crew investigation. Everyone on board gets dragged into this mess because you decided to play nursemaid to an illegal reptile. Owen felt Ash trembling against his chest. He tightened his arms protectively. It was dying, Captain. I couldn't just leave it. You should have reported it immediately. Would you have let me save it? Reeves didn't answer. He set down the datapad and rubbed his eyes. For the first time since Owen had known him, the captain looked old and tired. We dock at Waypoint Station 15 in 3 days, Reeves finally said. Station authorities will take custody of the creature. You'll face formal charges. Until then, it stays secured in your quarters with electronic monitoring. No exceptions. 3 more days. Owen nodded, not trusting his voice that, yes, he left the office with Ash. He heard Shira speak quietly to the captain in her native language. He only caught one word, translated through his implant.bond that IT sounded like both a diagnosis and a death sentence. Waypoint Station 15 appeared on the view screen like a city built from metal and glass, spinning slowly against the black. Owen stood in the observation deck with Ash wrapped in his jacket, watching their destination grow larger with each passing minute. The dragon had barely eaten in the past day, as if it somehow understood what was coming. Riley stood beside him, her reflection ghostly in the thick viewport. Still time to run, she said, not seriously. Where would we go? She didn't answer because there was no answer. You couldn't outrun the law in space. There was nowhere to hide when every station, every planet, every ship was connected by the same network of treaties and enforcement. The docking process took an hour. By the time the steady horizon locked into its berth, Owen's hands had gone numb from gripping the jacket too tightly. Ash pressed against his chest, silent now, just the sound of breathing and that rapid heartbeat. The xenobiology team arrived before Owen even made it to the airlock. For people in white containment suits carrying equipment that looked designed for capturing something dangerous. They surrounded him in the corridor, and the woman in front pulled off her helmet to reveal a narrow face with pale blue skin marked by darker lines that flowed like rivers. Centaurian, Owen Carter. Her voice was clinical, detached. I'm Dr. Senavoleris. We're here to retrieve the Pyraxis dragon currently in your possession. Its name is Ash, Owen said, hating how his voice shook. And it's not a possession. Dr. Voleris ignored this. She gestured to her team, and 2 of them moved forward with a reinforced carrier, the kind with bars and electronic locks. Ash saw it and made a sound Owen had never heard before, high and sharp like breaking glass. The specimen will need to be sedated, one of the other team members said. Absolutely not. Owen snapped. You sedate a dragon this young, and it might not wake up. Dr. Voleris raised one eyebrow. You have xenobiological training. I have common sense. And I've kept Ash alive for almost 2 weeks when your databases said it should have died in 3 days. Something flickered across the doctor's face, but she maintained her professional mask. The dragon must come with us. This isn't negotiable. You can either surrender it voluntarily, or we'll call security to forcibly remove it." Owen looked down at Ash. The dragon stared back with those golden eyes that held too much understanding for something so small. He thought about fighting, about making them drag him away screaming. But that would only terrify Ash more. "Let me carry you to your facility," he said quietly. "Please, let me be the one." Dr. Valeris considered this, then nodded. "You have 10 minutes. The walk through the station felt surreal. Crowds of aliens and humans moved past without paying attention to the strange procession. Owen kept his eyes forward and his arms tight around Ash. The dragon had gone completely still, like a small statue against his chest. The xenobiology facility occupied an entire section of the station's lower ring. Through transparent walls, Owen could see dozens of environments, each one carefully constructed to house different species. Everything was clean and temperature-controlled and utterly lifeless. They brought him to a containment unit that had been prepared specifically for Ash. The environment looked perfect on paper. Heat lamps, Brupe substrata, even what looked like a small pool of water. But it was still a cage. "You need to put the specimen in the unit now," Dr. Valeris said. Owen knelt down and unwrapped Ash from his jacket. The dragon's claws immediately dug into his shirt, refusing to let go. For a moment, they stayed like that, locked together while the xenobiology team watched. "Hey," Owen whispered, touching his forehead to Ash's snout. "You're going to be okay. These people will take care of you." Ash made that breaking glass sound again. I know, but I can't stay with you." Owen's throat closed up. He carefully uncurled Ash's claws from his shirt and placed the dragon on the floor of the containment unit. Ash immediately tried to climb back out, but Owen stepped away before his resolve could crumble. The door sealed with a soft hiss. Ash threw itself against the transparent barrier, clawing and crying out. The sound was worse than anything Owen had experienced in his entire life. "The specimen will calm down once it adjusts," Dr. Valeris said, making notes on her data pad. Owen wanted to hit her. Instead, he pressed his hand against the barrier where Ash was frantically scratching from the other side. "You take care of it," he said, his voice raw. "You hear me? Ash isn't a specimen or a thing. You keep it safe." Dr. Valeris met his eyes for the first time with something other than clinical detachment. "We will do everything in our power to ensure its survival." Station security arrived to escort Owen back to his ship. He left the facility with Ash's cries echoing down the corridor behind him. Even after the doors closed and the sound cut off, he could still hear it in his head. Riley was waiting at the airlock. She took one look at his face and pulled him into a brief, fierce hug. "Come on," she said. "Captain wants to break orbit in an hour." Owen followed her through the ship in a daze. His quarters felt wrong without Ash, too quiet and too cold. He sat on his bunk and stared at the jacket that still held the shape of a small dragon curled up for warmth. Somewhere on this station, Ash was alone in a cage. It would be fed the right food and kept at the right temperature and studied by people who understood dragon biology better than Owen ever could. But it wouldn't understand why Owen had left. It wouldn't understand anything except that the one person it trusted had abandoned it. Owen pulled the jacket against his chest and finally let himself cry, hoping that Dr. Valeris was right and Ash would adjust, hoping that dragons were resilient enough to forget, even though he knew, deep in his bones, that neither of those things was true. Dr. Senna Valeris had studied xenobiology for 30 years across 12 different worlds. She had cataloged species that existed only in caves so deep they'd never seen light. She had watched creatures adapt to environments that would kill most beings in seconds. She considered herself unshakable in her understanding of biology and behavior. The dragon was proving her wrong. She stood outside the containment unit at hour 14, watching the small crimson creature curl into an ever tighter ball in the corner farthest from the door. It hadn't moved in 3 hours, hadn't responded to food offerings, temperature adjustments, or even the pheromone cocktail that should have triggered basic curiosity responses. "Vitals?" she asked her assistant, a young human named Pip who'd been monitoring the sensors. "Stable, but declining. Heart rate down 12%. Body temperature dropped 4 degrees. It's not hypothermia yet, but we're trending that direction. Pip frowned at her screen. It's like the dragon is just shutting down. Dragons don't shut down. They're one of the most resilient species in known space. But even as she said it, Volaris knew something was deeply wrong. She'd reviewed every case study, every research paper on Pyraxis dragons. Nothing matched what she was seeing. By hour 20, the dragon had stopped moving entirely. Its scales, which should have been bright and reflective, had dulled to the color of old ash. The readings showed it was alive, but barely. Like a machine running on emergency power, conserving every bit of energy for basic functions. Volaris called in her senior team. 5 specialists gathered around the containment unit, each offering theories that fell apart under scrutiny. Viral infection, but all tests came back negative. Genetic defect, except the DNA scans showed perfect health. Rejection of artificial environment, though the unit replicated Pyraxis conditions better than most natural habitats. What if it's behavioral? Pip said hesitantly. Everyone turned to look at her. The young woman flushed but continued. I mean, what if it's not biological at all? What if the dragon is grieving? Dr. Volaris felt irritation spike through her professional calm. Dragons don't grieve. They lack the neurological complexity for emotional trauma. With respect, Doctor, how do we know that? Every study on Pyraxis dragons has been conducted on dead specimens or fully mature adults captured in the wild. Nobody's studied hatchling psychology because transporting them is illegal. Pip pulled up data on her screen. And there are documented cases of other species showing grief responses that manifest physically. In mammals and some avian species, yes. Not reptiles. Dragons aren't exactly standard reptiles, though, are they? Another team member spoke up, a Hervin with the kind of tentative voice people used when disagreeing with authority. Their brain structure is closer to dolphins than to lizards. The neural density suggests high-level cognition. Volaris wanted to dismiss this. Every instinct trained into her over 3 decades screamed that animals were animals, that anthropomorphizing them led to bad science. But she was watching a dragon die for no medical reason, and pride was a poor substitute for results. Pull up everything we have on human-dragon interactions, she ordered. The answer, as it turned out, was almost nothing. Dragons were too rare, too regulated, too dangerous to study in proximity to other species. But there were references, scattered mentions in old texts about dragons bonding to specific individuals during a critical development window. Hour 36. The dragon's heart rate had dropped another 15%. It barely registered when they entered the containment unit to perform another examination. Its breathing was shallow, eyes half closed. It's dying, Pip said, her voice cracking. We have to do something. Volaris stood in the center of her pristine laboratory, surrounded by the best equipment money could buy in decades of accumulated knowledge, and admitted the truth to herself. We don't know how to save it. The silence that followed was broken by alarms. The dragon's vital signs were entering critical levels. They had hours at best, maybe less. Contact Owen Carter, Volaris heard herself say. Her team stared at her. Pip recovered first. The human from the cargo ship? They left the station 2 days ago. Then find them. Send an emergency transmission. Offer to pay for fuel, docking fees, whatever it costs. Volaris looked at the dying dragon and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Fear of being wrong. If this creature bonded to that human during a critical imprint period, then he's not just familiar. He might be necessary for survival. The communication went out within minutes, flagged as urgent. But the steady horizon was 3 days away at maximum speed. Even if they turned around immediately, it would be 6 days before Owen Carter could return to the station. The dragon didn't have 6 days. It barely had 6 hours. Volaris did everything she could think of. She tried playing recordings of Owen's voice that she'd pulled from security footage. The dragon's ears twitched once, then went still. She attempted to introduce compatible species as companions. The dragon didn't react. She even broke protocol and sat in the containment unit herself, speaking softly, but the creature showed no awareness of her presence. By hour 48, The xenobiology team worked in near silence, each person performing their duties with mechanical precision while watching something they couldn't explain and couldn't fix. The dragon lay on its side now, scales so dull they looked gray. Its breathing came in stutters. Pip sat outside the containment unit during her break, eating nothing, just staring at the small, failing creature. "I have a brother," she said quietly. "When he was 5, he had surgery, and they wouldn't let my mom stay with him in recovery. He cried for 6 hours straight until he made himself sick. They finally broke the rules and brought her in. He stopped crying the second he saw her." Valeris wanted to say that wasn't the same thing, that humans and dragons were different, that science didn't work on anecdotes and feelings. But she was tired, and the dragon was dying, and maybe Pip understood something that all of Valeris's education had missed. "The human better get here in time," was all she said. Hour 56. The dragon's heart rate dropped below critical threshold. Staff prepared end-of-life protocols. Hour 60. A message arrived from the steady horizon. They were coming back. The message came through while Owen was elbow-deep in a cooling system that had decided to malfunction at the worst possible time. His communicator buzzed against his hip, displaying an emergency priority flag that made his heart stutter. He wiped grease off his hands and opened the transmission to Doctor. Senna Valeris appeared on the small screen, and Owen's first thought was that she looked exhausted. Her pale blue skin seemed duller than before, the dark lines across her face more pronounced. When she spoke, her clinical detachment had vanished. "Mr. Carter, the dragon is dying. We've tried everything within our medical capabilities, but it's not responding to treatment. It's not eating, not moving, barely breathing." She paused, and Owen saw something in her expression he hadn't expected. "Shame. I was wrong about the nature of the bond. I need you to come back." Owen's hands went numb. "How long does it have?" "Hours. Maybe a day if we're fortunate. I'm authorizing full compensation for fuel and docking fees. The station will cover all costs." "I don't care about the money," Owen said, already moving toward the bridge. "We're turning around now." Captain Reeves was reviewing cargo manifests when Owen burst onto the bridge. Riley was there too, checking navigation data. They both looked up as Owen started talking, words tumbling over each other in his urgency to explain. Reeves held up one hand to stop him. "I got the same message. Already started calculating the return trajectory." Owen stared at him. "Sir, you think I made a stone?" Reeves pulled up the navigation display. 3 days at maximum burn. We're running the engines hot, which means maintenance costs come out of this quarter's profits. The crew already voted unanimously to authorize it. "We did." Owen looked at Riley, who smiled. "Shira started the vote," she said. "Turns out Talveen have stories about bonding too. Old ones from before their species got all civilized and forgot how to feel things." Owen felt something crack in his chest, but this time it wasn't breaking. "Thank you. Save your thanks for when we actually get there in time," Reeves said gruffly. "Now get off my bridge and make sure those engines don't explode from the strain." The next 3 days were the longest of Owen's life. He worked 20-hour shifts, keeping the steady horizon running at speeds it wasn't designed for. The ship rattled and groaned like a living thing in pain. Warning lights flashed constantly. Owen ignored them all, coaxing every bit of power from systems that should have shut down for safety protocols. Riley brought him food he didn't eat and made him sleep in 4-hour chunks. She didn't try to make conversation, just sat with him in the engine room while he worked, a silent presence that kept him from spiraling into panic. On the second day, another message came from Dr. Valeris. Owen almost didn't open it, terrified of what it might say. But he forced himself to watch. The doctor stood outside Ash's containment unit. Behind her, Owen could see his dragon, barely visible as a small gray shape in the corner. "It's still alive," Valeris said quietly. "Barely, but I thought you should know it's fighting. I don't understand the mechanism, but it's fighting to stay alive." Owen replayed that message 17 times over the next 24 hours. The steady horizon screamed into Waypoint Station 15 space with alarms blaring and hull temperature 20 degrees past safe limits. Station control tried to make them slow down for proper approach protocols. Reeves told them in extremely colorful language what they could do with their protocols. They docked hard, the magnetic clamps shrieking as they locked. Owen was already running before the airlock finished cycling. He pushed past station security, ignoring their shouts. Riley ran behind him, clearing a path with her military voice and zero tolerance for delays. Doctor Valeris was waiting at the xenobiology facility entrance. She didn't waste time with greetings, just turned and led him through corridors at a pace just short of running. The facility staff they passed stopped and stared, but nobody tried to interfere. It stopped responding to any stimuli 18 hours ago, Valeris said as they walked. Heart rate is 35% below baseline. Brain activity suggests minimal consciousness. I should prepare you for the possibility that even if it recognizes you, the damage might be too severe. Owen didn't answer. He couldn't form words past the fear lodged in his throat. The containment unit looked the same as before, perfect and sterile and wrong. But Ash had changed. The vibrant crimson dragon he'd left behind was now the color of old charcoal, scales dull and lifeless. It lay on its side, so still that for a horrible moment Owen thought they were too late. Then he saw the faint rise and fall of breathing. "Override the door," he said. Valeris didn't argue. The barrier slid open with a soft hiss. Owen stepped inside and dropped to his knees beside Ash. He was vaguely aware of Valeris and her team watching through the transparent wall, sensors recording everything. He didn't care. His entire world had narrowed to the small broken creature in front of him. "Hey," he whispered, touching Ash's side. The scales were cool, too cool. "Hey, I'm here. I'm sorry I took so long. I'm so sorry." Nothing. No movement, no sound. Just that shallow breathing that could stop at any moment. Owen lay down on the floor and carefully gathered Ash against his chest, the way he'd done 100 times before. The dragon felt like a small stone, heavy and cold. He pressed his face against Ash's snout and just breathed, willing some of his own warmth into the creature. "Please," he said to the dragon, to the universe, to anything that might be listening. "Please don't leave. I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere." For long seconds, nothing changed. Owen held Ash and felt tears running down his face and tried to accept that he'd arrived too late. Then Ash's ear twitched. Just once, so subtle Owen almost missed it that he held his breath. Ash's eyes opened, just barely, golden slits and gray scales. The dragon made a sound, so quiet and weak it was almost nothing, but it was everything. Recovery wasn't instant, though Owen desperately wished it could be. Ash stayed pressed against his chest for nearly an hour, barely moving, just breathing. Owen kept one hand on the dragon's back, feeling the slow return of warmth under his palm, like watching ice melt in reverse. Doctor Valeris stood outside the containment unit with her team, all of them silent. Monitoring equipment tracked every change in Ash's vitals. Heart rate slowly climbing. Body temperature rising degree by careful degree. Brain activity patterns shifting from shutdown to something approaching normal function. "Impossible," one of the xenobiology team whispered. "It shouldn't work this fast." But it was working. Ash lifted its head, movement shaky but deliberate, and pressed its snout against Owen's neck. The sound it made was stronger now, that wind through leaves purr that Owen had thought he'd never hear again. "You scared me," Owen said, his voice rough. "Don't do that again." Ash's response was to climb further up his chest and wrap itself around his shoulders, tail curling down his back. The position was familiar, one they'd fallen into dozens of times before. Owen reached into his pocket and pulled out the protein bar he'd been carrying since they left the station 3 days ago. He tore off a small piece and chewed it carefully before offering it to Ash. The dragon sniffed it, hesitated, then ate. One small piece became 2, then 3. By the 5th piece, Ash was eating with something close to enthusiasm. The door opened and Dr. Valeris stepped inside, moving slowly. "May I examine it?" Owen tensed but nodded. Valeris approached with her scanner, keeping her movements careful and predictable. Ash watched her with wary golden eyes, but didn't protest when she ran the device over its body. "Remarkable," she said softly, reviewing the data. 80% recovery in 90 minutes. The physiological rebound shouldn't be possible. She looked at Owen with something that might have been respect. You saved its life. Twice now. Will they still take Ash away? Owen asked, dreading the answer. Valeris was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned and addressed the observation room where station authorities had gathered. I need to speak with Station Administrator Grant. Immediately. 20 minutes later, Owen sat in a conference room with Ash curled on his lap and what felt like half the station's bureaucracy staring at them. Dr. Valeris stood at the head of the table with data, displays showing Ash's near death and recovery. This is unprecedented, she said, her clinical voice firmly back in place. We've documented the first confirmed case of imprint bonding between a Pyraxis dragon and a human. The bond is not only psychological, but physiological. Separation caused systematic shutdown of non-essential functions. The dragon was essentially dying by choice. Administrator Grant, a heavy-set human with gray hair and a permanent scowl, leaned forward. So you're saying if we separate them again, it'll kill the creature? Most likely, yes. And even if the dragon survived, the psychological trauma would prevent it from forming healthy social bonds with any species. It would be functionally broken. This is still an illegal possession of a restricted species, Grant said, but his voice lacked conviction. Under normal circumstances, yes. But these aren't normal circumstances. Valeris pulled up another display. Pyraxis dragons are classified as restricted due to their danger when fully grown. But we have no data on raised versus wild dragons. Every dragon in documented history has been wild-caught, which means aggressive and territorial. We have an opportunity here to study a dragon raised in proximity to other species from hatching. Owen held Ash a little tighter. I'm not letting you use Ash as an experiment. I'm not suggesting we do, Valeris said. I'm suggesting we grant you legal guardianship under scientific observation. Regular check-ins, behavioral documentation, proof of proper care. In exchange, Ash remains with you. Grant looked skeptical. You want to give a cargo technician custody of a creature that grows to 12 meters and breathes fire? I want to acknowledge reality, Valeris countered. The bond exists whether we approve it or not. We can work with it, or we can cause unnecessary death. Those are our options. The room dissolved into arguing. Regulations were cited and dismissed. Someone brought up insurance liability. Someone else mentioned precedent cases with other species. Owen stopped listening and focused on Ash, who had fallen asleep against his chest, breathing steady and warm. Riley appeared in the doorway and caught his eye. She gave him a small nod that somehow conveyed both support and confidence. Behind her, he could see other crew members from the steady horizon, even Captain Reeves, waiting in the corridor. The debate lasted 2 hours. In the end, it came down to simple practicality. They couldn't separate Owen and Ash without killing Ash. They couldn't imprison Owen for 20 years with a dragon that would die without him. And nobody particularly wanted to be responsible for the death of a potentially intelligent species because of bureaucratic inflexibility. Administrator Grant signed the authorization with obvious reluctance. One incident, Mr. Carter. One complaint about that creature, and this arrangement is terminated. Understood. Understood. Owen said, barely believing it was real. The paperwork took another hour. Owen signed documents promising regular veterinary care, behavioral monitoring, and immediate reporting of any aggressive tendencies. Dr. Valeris added her own notes about the scientific value of the study. By the time everything was finalized, Ash had woken up and was chewing on Owen's shirt collar. I'll need to see you both monthly for the first year, Valeris said as they prepared to leave. After that, quarterly unless issues arise. She paused, then added quietly, I apologize for my initial handling of the situation. I'll let protocol override judgment. Owen met her eyes and saw genuine regret there. You called us back. That's what mattered. They returned to the steady horizon together, Owen carrying Ash and Riley walking beside them. The crew had apparently been busy during the hours of bureaucratic wrangling. Owen's quarters had been expanded, the walls knocked out to combine his room with an adjacent storage space. Someone had installed proper heating elements and ventilation. There was even a padded platform that looked suspiciously like a dragon-sized bed. Crew voted on it. Riley explained at his shocked expression. Figured if we're keeping a dragon on board, we should do it properly. Owen looked around at the faces of people he'd worked with for years, but never really connected with. They were smiling, even Shira with her forearms crossed, but her expression softer than usual. "Thank you," he managed. "All of you." Captain Reeves grunted. "Just keep that thing out of my engine room." But he was almost smiling too. That night, Owen lay in his expanded quarters with Ash curled against his side, scales finally bright crimson again in the soft light. Through the viewport, stars stretched away in all directions. Somewhere out there were regulations and restrictions, and people who still thought dragons were just dangerous animals. But here, in this small space, among people who understood that sometimes the rules needed breaking, Owen had everything that mattered. A ship that felt like home, crew that felt like family, and a dragon that chose him, chose to live, chose to trust despite every reason not to. Ash shifted in sleep, one clawed foot pressing against Owen's hand. Outside, the steady horizon broke orbit and turned toward the next destination, carrying its cargo and its secrets toward whatever came next. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Owen felt completely at peace.